Now, still we're on the question of progressive revelations. Now, so Baha'u'llah says that all these manifestations of God, it just did not happen haphazardly. The reason why Jesus came 2,000 years ago was that there's a higher force up there who directed that source of light. That source of light directed Jesus to be the manifestation of God to shine on humanity. So one thing we say is that it's not haphazard. These progressive revelations come at a place and at a time, one after another, for a reason, to reawaken humankind. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, yet that you mentioned, that we all have capacity to shine, to be bright within our frame, the drop that we mentioned.
Well, I love the idea of the mirror, and I have a story about the mirror, but we all have the capacity to be a mirror from the source.
Right. But then maybe, this is the way I understand it based on Baha'u'llah's writings and the scriptures. That yes, God is the source of light. These manifestations of God are the perfect mirrors, but then because we cannot understand the essence of God, we understand God and His attributes through these perfect mirrors. These perfect mirrors shine on us. Now, I think that if there wasn't Jesus, there wouldn't have been a unity movement.
Correct.
So you see, because of that, it's because of Jesus where we have the unity movement. So I think in that respect, then we agree. So he says, progressive revelation is that these perfect mirrors come from God, and then within those perfect mirrors, then there are hundreds and hundreds of pure souls, and those pure souls are just like secondary mirrors, like in different traditions, like Mother Teresa and Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Fillmore's. These are the secondary light still within that framework of that major light, who was Jesus or Buddha.
So, it's slightly different. I mean, that's beautifully put, and I think that that's pretty much the way the world works. Secondary, third, fourth generation of light bouncing around between us, and that's one of the reasons that we're here, is to reflect the light for each other. The goal of the unity movement would be to transcend the mirrors, to go back to source, very much one of the things that's difficult for a lot of unity students in the Catholic Church is if the priest or the Pope is the go-between between the source and ourselves. And unity pushes against that our job is to transcend another being as to finding the light, to thank you for the way you have reflected the light, but to go directly to the source. Now, that would also apply to Jesus, that eventually our job is to transcend, and as Jesus said, I didn't do this. This healing that happened, it was the source within me that did this work, not me. That our job is to follow that example and to get to the place where the internal world, I am so connected to the source, I no longer need the mirror. That the mirror is no longer necessary. It's a wonderful tool, but the job is to get to the higher vibration where I no longer need the mirror. I am living as the mirror itself. So, again, to progressive revelations, if I have to wait, I'm not going to live 1,000 years. And I think that to wait for the next, and then you use the reference, God out here has sent the enlightened, the messengers and awakened. Unity, we try, although there is an embedded theology we have to transcend. We would never refer to God here. It would always be God has vibrated at such a level that a messenger has emerged, and that messenger exists within me, whether I ever never heard of Jesus. And then back to your question, the unity movement would not exist without Jesus. I'm not too sure about that. It may be through a different lens. It may be through a different revelation, but I believe that there was a divine idea that needed to be birthed on the planet through the religious science movement, or Ernest Holmes, through Charles Fillmore and Myrtle Fillmore, the unity movement, that there was an evolution of consciousness that needed to be born at that time. And there wasn't a waiting around for 1,000 years for that next revelation to come. It is part.
Good point.
It is part of a collective. Every one of them is a cell within the whole. But if I have to wait 1,000 years, I believe that you have spoken things to me, not to flatter you, but that you have said things from the lens. You might consider yourself a secondary mirror for me, from the Baha'i tradition, that have been very meaningful to me and beautiful to me. I believe that you are such a man and such a spirit that if you had never heard about Baha'u'llah or the Bab, that light still could have been reflected, and that great things could have come from your mouth to my ears, to my soul, that would have been a revelation and a new understanding without the context of the mirror, that it's getting closer and closer to the source.
I totally understand what you're saying. We're still on the question of progressive revelations.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I guess we agree that these manifestations of God, message of God, have been like perfect mirrors.
Perfect mirrors.
Perfect mirrors. And then within those perfect mirrors, there have been what I like to call secondary mirrors of Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Fillmore and others, who have further clarified many of those mysteries and have continued to shine on humanity, on large groups. But still, from the Baha'i perspective, and I think that's from the perspective of all religions, I mean, particularly Jesus has so many passages, I don't recall exactly. Who says that with regard to Jews who were waiting, that you were waiting, but then they did not see the light in Jesus, even though that was fulfillment of all the prophecies in the Old Testament. So in that respect, Baha'u'llah explained these progressive revelations is not haphazard. There's a timing, there's a place, there's a sequence, and that within those sequences there's the improvement. But then I'd like us to come to this point now. That until the revelation of Baha'u'llah, which was 150 years ago, something like that, because humanity had not reached the age of maturity, therefore this message would come, Buddha or Jesus, would bring this message, would give it to humankind, and then there was a lot of trial and error among humanity. And then because of this trial and error, some people found it in this manner, some people found it in another manner. They thought it was the same truth, which even though was not the purpose of Jesus, I'm giving Jesus as an example, but contributed to a lot of division. And that's why Baha'u'llah says the effectiveness of each revelation, the true effectiveness, is about 1,000 years. And if you look back at Christianity as an example, in particular in Christianity, when I studied the history of Christianity, until the year 1000 we had one Christianity. It was right at that point which was split into the Orthodox and the Catholics. And then at the point of a split, then it seems like the darkness came. The darkness of crusade, the darkness of inquisition.
Well, and the danger there, if I were to liken it to our previous metaphor, is the secondary and third mirrors that said, let me be the voice for Jesus, caused the fracture of the light. The light then fractured because, well, I understand it better than you do. I understand the message of this great prophet and teacher better than you do, so let me reflect his light in a certain way. And somebody over there is reflecting it differently. Unity would say, bypass all those secondary mirrors and go right to the original mirror and have the experience that is your experience. Go directly to God, and maybe, and I don't know how it is in Baha'i, it's probably less fractured. The message is less fractured, but if I wait 1,000 years, could it be, with all due respect, that the Baha'i tradition could also get fractured? Your perspective, somebody else's perspective, is there disagreement about how to interpret the beautiful holy words, a secondary mirror? And really, I think that this is a place of agreement as well. Go to the words and interpret them for yourself, rather than through somebody else's lens.
Okay.
I may have taken you on a bunny trail there.
No, this is right on the path of progressive revelations. So these prophets come, these messengers come, they are perfect mirrors. they guide humanity, particularly in the first 1,000 years, but not because there was anything wrong with the message of Jesus or Moses or Buddha, but because of the human ego and because of the newer needs of humanity. For example, the Luther movement. From what I said from the Luther movement, the Catholic Church had become too rigid, and they had done a lot of bad things, including trying even for the science not to advance through putting Galileo in jail. You know,
yes,
1660.
putting him to death.
Wanting to put him to death and things of that nature. So, not letting Christians to read the Bible. All your things, right?
The go-between. It's the go-between. The Pope is
Right.
the authority.
He's
You
the authority.
don't read it.
You don't
Oh
read
no, you don't read it. And I think behind read it, please read it. And bypass the secondary mirrors.
So, Baha'u'llah says for whatever reason, then these religions split into hundreds of sects. You know, there's 72, 73 sects in Islam, hundreds of sects in Christianity, and then they fought fiercely for generations. And Shias and Sunnis are still fighting in the Middle East, and so he says that's one of the reasons that humanity, no matter how good the intention may be, cannot put those factions back together. It's only the renewal of religion through that main source of light, which is God, who brings the other manifestation to bring us to that source of unity. So, what Baha'u'llah suggests in this respect is that, for one thing, as you know very well, and you practice it very well as well, is that he says that in this day and age we don't need preachers. You know, for example, I'm a nobody Baha'i. You know, I don't belong to any even institutions. I'm just a Baha'i.
Well, and the fact that I'm speaking for the Unity movement is counter to everything I believe. I'm speaking for myself.
Yes, I know. So then in that respect, Baha'u'llah says that in this day and age, you don't need a preacher to tell you what's right, what's wrong. Go to the depth of your heart again, as you said, and read it for yourself and find the truth. So that's one thing. But then he says that no source other than the source itself can put it back together. No. That's the huge claim of Baha'u'llah. That's why he wants you to read all of this stuff that I brought to you here today. And say that whether he was the Messiah, or he was an imposter, or he was not the Messiah, whether he had a plan toward the goal of Jesus, peace on earth as it is in heaven, can the different denominations reach that? And he claims that the plan that he has would take us to that point. We have started on that path, and that path is the path that began in 1893, the passive interfaith. So that through this interfaith that particularly you and I can see, I've been visiting a number of churches the past couple of weeks, I told you, that we see the light in all of us, and we see the unity in all of us.
But does
We
there
work on that path.
Does there come a stopping point in the interfaith exploration? This is a question I ask myself. We can coexist together with the common moral teachings, with the common expressions that we all agree upon, but as we dig into the deeper aspects of the theology, we inevitably come up against, well, I'm right and you're wrong, in many of the world's traditions. So we don't play there, but it's still there. Is the job to eventually transcend all dogma, to transcend all writings, to transcend all holy scriptures, to then be the vibrating center of what the scriptures contain within them, those divine ideas, and we let go of that which is divisive. For instance, we can spend time with our Muslim friends, but they will not acknowledge that the Baha'i faith has value. But they can certainly appreciate you as a wonderful human being and a wonderful gathering of people, but by doctrine, eventually we come up against the wall. It is invalid. That Baha'u'llah is invalid.
It's impossible.
In the Christian world, eventually, if we spend time with my Christian brothers and sisters, they will come to the place in our exploration that says that unity is also invalid. It is a distortion of Jesus' truth. because it doesn't agree with mine. Is there, and this is only a question because I wrestle with this, eventually we need to transcend all the words, the beautiful Holy Bible, all the words of Charles Fillmore, all the words of Baha'u'llah, that we then are radiating as brothers, not even as brothers, but as one. Where there is no Iraj and Richard, there is just the presence of life. I don't know the answer to that, but I know it is an extremely worthy goal, and perhaps it will be darker before it is brighter, because we have to confront our mythology, we have to confront our scriptures where they served as a revelation that was necessary at a given point, but are now outdated, that are now at the place where we have to transcend them because our understanding of God has now expanded. Our understanding of oneness and unity has expanded beyond something that was written 1,000 years ago. And that is a universal questioning of the own writings that inform my spiritual path today. Will I get to the point, or does humanity get to the point where it no longer is necessary, and in fact it is a hindrance to, maybe beyond interfaith, it's just the state of oneness?
Well, and that's just a conjecture that sure, maybe in 10,000 years, in 20,000 years, what you're saying may come.
Could it be tomorrow?
But my understanding that it cannot be tomorrow, it cannot be 1,000 years from now. When I read Baha'u'llah's writings, I see the connection. I internalized a much higher value for what I knew from Moses and Jesus and Buddha, because he shows us in one of his books called the Book of Certitude. Is that the one? Yeah, the Book of Certitude. In this book, which is the Book of Certitude, one of these books, it looks like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, probably the lower one here.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the Book of Certitude, he shows us that connection. That for one thing, these religions were connected. They all came from that source. That source authorized it as to when the next one should come. I don't know until when. Maybe until there's peace on earth as is in heaven. And that peace on earth as is on heaven, movements such as unity and others can help. But from my understanding, it won't take us there. Now, I want to make 2 points here. One,
Can we pause for one moment?
Please.
There? Just to ask a question. So the Islamic world does not recognize the prophecy of the Baha'i faith. Well, my understanding is that then that the Baha'i faith would not recognize the prophecy of Charles Fillmore, which came later, not much later. No, the time is not right. You have to return to Baha'u'llah, because Charles Fillmore is a secondary light, and you need to go to the Baha'i faith for the real light, even though we're saying the same thing. And I would say that the revelation of Charles Fillmore is equally as valid as that of the Bab. And that the revelation of Wayne Dyer is equally as valid as Charles Fillmore. That these are all steps, and perhaps there are plateaus. Every 1,000 years there's a plateau to the next prophet and sage, but there are steps to get to that point that are necessary steps, that are being gospels, if you will, that are being revealed today, that are getting us to that next place where the whole humanity is raised to the new vibration, and then the new teacher shows up.
well, you are in effect answering that question in many ways. Yes, these are the steps to take us to another plateau for the next manifestation to come, something to that effect. Yes. Also, I want to mention in one of these books, Abdul Baha mentions in one of his books that there are many who may not have even heard of the word Baha'i.
Many.
Millions. But he says, this is the spirit of the age. I guess we had that discussion sometime.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. But this is the spirit that if you don't rise and spread this message, others will do it. And these others, for example, unity. Unity movement, for example, you are the ones who invited Baha'is and encouraged them to come and do this. He said,
because I realized that there's such a beautiful message in the Baha'i faith that is not being heard. And the same is true of unity.
Right.
We're the best kept secret. Why are we a secret? Why are we afraid to espouse something that is so relevant to the evolving of humanity and that has been such a gift? And so that's why I asked the question, why are Baha'i so silent? And it was not to critique.
Right.
It was because I want the answer to why are people in unity so silent.
Right, right. So in that respect, I guess it's sort of answer to the question, and then what you mentioned yourself, is that these movements help us toward that ultimate unity and oneness of the humankind and real unity and peace on earth. It helps. But then what Baha'u'llah is asking humanity, particularly enlightened people like Richard Burdick, is that please read and reflect on some of those solutions that he has. For example, among these solutions is that yes, things happened and mankind was immature and we had to have ministers, and these ministers, some of them divided mankind into this sect and that sect and that sect, and started their own, and split further and further and further. But then he says that at this time, Baha'u'llah, through the force of God, is putting a stop to it. You mentioned that with that split also into the... And the way he has put a stop to it is that he says that, for one thing, he said, as long as I'm living, of course, Jesus was crucified. He was crucified by being in jail for 40 years, and exiled in jail, and tortured and all of that.
Crucifixions come in many forms.
In many forms. And he kept writing, and smuggling it out of jail. And then encouraged anybody who became his followers to ask questions. Ask questions, because all these questions are important for posterity. And it became thousands of questions and answers. As to, among them, how is it possible not to split? Because all these religions split. And his solution is that he has a book which is called the Book of Covenant. That you have a covenant with God. You are now mature human beings. We study it. And also he said that I'm going to, based on what he was told by God, that for this age we will create a democratic system which is different from all democracies. And democratic system is what we call the local spiritual assemblies, national spiritual assemblies, and then what we call universal house of justice.
Which I, in my humble opinion, would liken to a great spiritual democracy.
It is spiritual democracy.
Right, and getting us away from hierarchical spirituality.
Right. And then you said that none of these individuals, as you probably know, even on universal, there are 9 people from across the globe,
right,
who are elected as members of universal justice. But they said together you can act, and together you can decide. But then individually you're just like any other Baha'i. You're not even one step higher than them.
See, and I think that's the ultimate goal. And I joke that my job is to work myself out of a job as a minister.
Right.
You know, to eventually have such a congregation that everybody is the mirror for themselves, and that everything is collaborative. The cells are all working together. The small body, maybe it's cells within the hand, they're all working together, and the hand then is cooperating with a unity church in a whole different country as part of a larger body. I believe that's the ultimate goal within the Baha'i tradition, within the unity tradition, and hopefully within the interfaith exploration, is that we realize we're using different words, we're having different ways of expressing it, we're expressing the same thing. I have hope that that's possible. In our world today, sometimes you can get very tired. Because as much as you wave that banner in the air, there are people waving more loudly against it.
Yes. So again, on the question of progressive revelation, and the question of coming together, and the question of the possibility, not only possibility, but he calls inevitability of oneness of the humankind. For example, in this small group of 5-6 million Baha'is, that's the way they do it. So, and then this universal justice, he tells them in his covenant, and he has a book called the Book of Covenant, which says that's the way you will do it. And that he says that anything that I have codified would be the rule. So in a way, you can call Baha'is, I mean, I don't like to use the word fundamentalist, but it is fundamentalist in that sense. He says that I gave you all of these things, I answered all of your questions, and then my son, that I I would tell him to be, because he has lived all his life with me, and he has read all my writings, he would explain everything to you until he dies, which he died in 1921. And then he says, at the point when universal justice is formed, anything which is not codified, anything that you still have questions, and there were still lots of questions, that's why this last book came about, the book of questions. You can still ask that source, and that source, either unanimously or majority vote, should give you the answer. But then when they give you the answer, that is the answer. You cannot come up with your own answers, because that would be hundreds of sections.
So let me ask a question, because I've heard the term many times in my associations with my friends from the Baha'i tradition, the mouthpiece. The mouthpiece of God, that Baha'u'llah and the Bab, these were the mouthpieces, right?
Yes.
God speaks to humanity through them. Now, as I understand what you've just said, is the mouthpiece becomes a collaboration. That there is interpretation of these beautiful writings through 9 people?
9 people.
9 people. Do they then become the mouthpiece of God?
That's a wonderful question, and he has answer for that too. Basically, we call them the central figures of the Baha'i faith. The Bab, who was the forerunner of the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah, who was the founder of the Baha'i faith, and Abdul Baha, who was his son. He passed away in 1921. So this period, which was 1844 to 1921, is when we say that God was in contact with these guys to codify and write everything that humanity needs for the coming few centuries. And then in his covenant, what he put together as the covenant with this universal justice, he says, now I have given you all the laws, which means he's given us the prayers, the fasting, in terms of the rights of men and women, the question of races, nations, everything that you can think of. Altogether it's about 100 books in 100 volumes. But he says if there's anything whatsoever that is not in here, then universal justice can do it. But then he cannot change whatever he has revealed. So they're not allowed to interpret, they're allowed to elucidate. Elucidate? Yeah. Elucidate. Which means they clarify whatever is here if somebody doesn't understand it.
So is there the danger, as what's happened with Christianity, to clarify, I'm still clarifying through my lens? Or is the universal house of justice such that they are so connected to the God that they are not clarifying from the human ego or from their own interpretation, and perhaps that's a beautiful thing, that each Baha'i interprets the holy writings the same way. So if we've got 9 people, they have to come to an agreement about what it is, but there are millions of people that consider that they're all looking through their own lens, interpreting it their own way. Is that a danger? That very much like Jesus' words, unity likes to go back to the original Aramaic, because it is not from the Greek. It has been translated by thousands and peoples and rulers and kings and politicians that have twisted it.
Right.
What does the Baha'i tradition do to ward against my own interpretation?
Right. So because of all of this and more, all the interpretations we think, and I go through this, they have thought of the most minute things in different things are here. But they're still, we are human beings from all across the globe, from Africa and Asia and Europe. They come up with a new question that nobody had thought about. But Baha'u'llah says that they would be divinely inspired. I mean, because there's no interpretation. He says, when I say that in this dispensation, there's marriage is between one man and one woman, and that's it. So, South Justice cannot come and say that no, well, he really meant two women or something like that. He cannot change those rules. But then if there's anything which was not clear, they can clarify it. But he says in that respect, they're divinely inspired. But they're not allowed to interpret, they're allowed to elucidate. And that's another step toward unity.